When the gunsmith woman realized her 8-year plan to capture the most wanted war criminal was about to succeed, she discovered that everyone hunting the same man had been hunting each other all along. What happened next would expose the deadliest game of deception in intelligence history and reveal that some hunts end with the hunter becoming the hunted. Sarah Martinez opened her gun shop that Tuesday morning just like she had for 8 years. At 38, she was known as the best gunsmith in the Southwest. Her customers trusted her completely and valued her precise work above all else. The smell of gun oil and metal filings filled the air as she unlocked the heavy steel door and switched on the fluorescent lights that illuminated rows of precision tools hanging on pegboards. But what her customers didn't know was that Sarah Martinez wasn't really a gunsmith at all. Behind the counter where she spent her days cleaning barrels and adjusting triggers, Sarah was something far more dangerous. Every tool in her shop had been carefully selected not just for gunsmithing but for intelligence gathering. The microscopes she used to examine firing pins could analyze metallurgy from weapons used in war crimes. The computers that stored customer records contained encrypted files that would make international prosecutors weep with joy. And the woman who smiled and made small talk about hunting seasons and ammunition preferences was actually Agent Sarah Chen, one of the CIA's most patient and methodical field operatives. David Torres walked through her door at exactly 9:15, just like he had every few months for 8 years. Torres was a creature of habit, which made him predictable in ways that would soon prove fatal to his carefully constructed new identity. He moved with the controlled precision of someone who had learned that survival meant never revealing weakness, never breaking routine, never giving enemies anything they could use against him. What Torres didn't know was that every conversation had been recorded on equipment so sophisticated it could pick up his heartbeat from across the room. Every visit had been documented by cameras hidden in the shop's walls, ceiling, and even inside the coffee pot that sat perpetually brewing on the back counter. And every gun she'd worked on for him contained modifications he would never expect. Torres trusted Sarah completely, because trust was the one luxury he'd allowed himself in 8 years of careful paranoia. He always paid cash because cash left no trails that could be followed back to him. He never asked questions about her background because people who asked too many questions drew attention from the kind of people who had been hunting him since Afghanistan. But what Torres didn't realize was that his trust had been the perfect weapon turned against him, sharper than any blade and more dangerous than any bullet. Sarah watched Torres examine her latest work with the satisfaction of someone whose 8-year plan was finally reaching its conclusion. She had modified his favorite rifle with microscopic tracking devices that could be activated remotely, trigger mechanisms that could be disabled with a simple electronic signal, and, most importantly, components that would fail catastrophically if he ever tried to use the weapon against American personnel. Torres had become predictable in ways that would soon be very dangerous for him, but his predictability was exactly what Sarah had been counting on all along. But what Sarah didn't know was that today would be different from the routine visits that had defined their relationship for 8 years. Her carefully built world was about to crash into forces she never saw coming, and the game she thought she'd been playing would reveal itself to be far more complex than her mission briefings had ever suggested. The first sign something was wrong came when Torres arrived 30 minutes early, breaking a pattern he'd maintained religiously for years. Torres was carrying equipment that looked like he was planning to leave town fast and never come back. Sarah could tell from the worn duffel bag and the way he kept checking his watch that he was preparing for some kind of dangerous mission that would take him far from her shop and her surveillance. But Torres didn't seem like he was getting ready to fight, as she'd expected from someone planning a major operation. Instead, he seemed like he was running from something that had finally caught up with him after 8 years of careful hiding. Sarah had been waiting for this day for months because her intelligence sources had indicated that Torres was getting more and more paranoid about his safety. Agency analysts had noted changes in his behavior patterns that suggested he suspected someone was closing in on his location. He had started checking the street before coming into her shop, scanning for vehicles or people that didn't belong in the neighborhood. He would position himself where he could watch the parking lot through the shop's front window, ready to bolt if he saw anything suspicious. Taurus was expecting trouble from someone, but he had no idea that the biggest threat to his life had been standing behind her counter every day for 8 years, smiling and making conversation while documenting his every weakness. What Taurus also didn't know was that Sarah's gun work wasn't just good craftsmanship backed by years of training and experience. Every part she'd installed in his weapons over the years had been carefully selected for a secret purpose that went far beyond improving accuracy or reliability. Each modification contained technology that would allow remote monitoring, remote disabling, and if necessary, remote destruction of the weapons he trusted with his life. Torres would only find out what that purpose was when Sarah decided it was time to spring the trap she'd been building, component by component, visit by visit, over 8 long years of patient preparation. Sarah's 8 years of waiting were about to pay off in ways that would shock everyone involved, but especially Torres himself when he realized how completely he'd been manipulated. But Sarah's focus was broken when she saw movement outside that wasn't part of her operational plan. Through her window, she could see vehicles approaching that she didn't recognize, moving with tactical precision that suggested military or law enforcement training. Someone else was making a move against Taurus on the exact same day Sarah had chosen to finally reveal her true identity and finish her mission. What Sarah didn't realize was that these new arrivals weren't there by accident, and their timing wasn't coincidental. The vehicles were moving in coordinated patterns that suggested extensive surveillance and planning that might have been going on even longer than her own operation. The men getting out of the vehicles moved like soldiers who had seen combat in some of the world's most dangerous places. They moved together like they'd been planning this confrontation for as long as Sarah had been planning her operation, possibly longer. Their equipment was military grade, their formation was textbook perfect, and their faces showed something that Sarah's cold professional preparation didn't have. They showed personal hatred that only comes from being betrayed by someone you trusted with your life, someone whose betrayal had cost them everything they held dear. Taurus seemed completely unaware of the danger closing in from outside as he examined Sarah's latest work on his rifle. What Taurus didn't understand was that every modification Sarah had made to his guns had capabilities he'd never asked for and never suspected existed. Taurus was holding equipment that would soon reveal purposes far beyond just shooting straight and working reliably when he needed them most. The electronic components hidden within familiar mechanisms would soon show their true function in ways that would leave him completely helpless. The first man through Sarah's door moved like someone who'd been waiting years for this moment of confrontation. When he called Taurus by a name that wasn't David Taurus, Sarah realized her target's real identity was about to be exposed by someone who knew secrets that weren't even in her classified files. The name he used made Taurus freeze like a man who'd just seen a ghost from his past, a ghost he'd thought was buried forever. When Taurus heard his real name spoken aloud for the first time in 8 years, his reaction showed military training that no regular person should have possessed. Taurus moved into defensive positions that proved he had serious combat experience from some of the world's most dangerous conflicts. His movements were fluid, professional, and deadly efficient in ways that made Sarah understand that her 8-year target was much more dangerous than her mission files had ever indicated. But what happened next surprised everyone in the room, including Sarah, who thought she knew everything about the man she'd been hunting. The newcomer started talking about events that had happened in Afghanistan years before Sarah's operation had even begun, events that painted a picture of betrayal and murder that went far beyond anything in her classified briefings. Torres's face showed recognition and something that looked almost like relief as these long-buried secrets finally came to light. The newcomer's accusations painted a picture of betrayal worse than anything in Sarah's classified files. which she had thought contained the complete story of Torres's crimes. When he talked about murdered teammates, sold intelligence, and innocent civilians killed for profit, Sarah realized her 8-year hunt had been targeting someone whose crimes were worse than her darkest fears had imagined. The scope of Torres's betrayal went far beyond what any single intelligence agency had been able to piece together. Torres's response to these accusations was immediate and more terrifying than anything Sarah had prepared for. When Torres admitted to crimes that made Sarah's blood run cold, she understood that her mission briefings had barely scratched the surface of his true evil. What Torres said next about his motivations, his methods, and his complete lack of remorse would change everything Sarah thought she knew about justice, revenge, and the price of betraying the people who trusted you most. But Torres's confession did something to Sarah that 8 years of cold, professional planning hadn't prepared her for psychologically. When Sarah realized just how much worse Torres's crimes really were compared to what she'd been told, her professional distance disappeared completely. Something much more personal and much more dangerous took its place, something that her training had warned her to avoid at all costs. Things got much worse when Torres noticed Sarah's emotional reaction to what he'd revealed about his past. When Torres started to suspect that Sarah's shock and horror were more than just the concern of an innocent shop owner, his finely tuned survival instincts kicked in with deadly efficiency. Torres began to understand that his favorite gunsmith might not be who she seemed, and that realization made him more dangerous than he'd ever been. Sarah's 8 years of careful identity construction were about to be tested in ways she'd never expected or trained for. When Torres started asking pointed questions about Sarah's background, her reasons for being in this particular town, and why she cared so much about his confession to a stranger, Sarah realized her carefully built cover identity was cracking under pressure she hadn't seen coming. Every lie she'd told, every detail she'd fabricated, was suddenly under scrutiny from someone whose life depended on detecting deception. But Sarah wasn't the only one whose cover was in mortal danger from this unexpected confrontation. When the newcomer revealed his own connection to Torres's past crimes, Sarah understood she was trapped between two men whose shared history went much deeper and was much more violent than her intelligence files had ever suggested. This wasn't just about bringing a war criminal to justice anymore. This was about settling debts that had been accumulating interest for years. The newcomer's revelation about who he really was and why he'd been hunting Torres completely shocked Sarah's understanding of the entire situation. When Sarah learned that this man had been tracking Torres for even longer than she had, using resources and intelligence networks that rivaled her own agency's capabilities, her 8-year mission suddenly seemed like just one piece of a much bigger and more complicated puzzle that she'd never seen in its entirety. Torres looked at his rapidly deteriorating situation like the professional soldier he'd always been, even when he was betraying everything that uniform was supposed to represent. When Torres realized he was trapped between two people who wanted him for different but equally lethal reasons, his special forces training kicked in with cold efficiency. Torres understood that staying alive would mean killing everyone in the room who knew his secrets, and he began calculating the best way to accomplish that goal. Sarah's response to Torres's obvious threat showed abilities that surprised both men and revealed training that went far beyond anything a simple gunsmith should possess. When Sarah demonstrated combat skills that matched their own military backgrounds, Torres and his accuser realized they were dealing with someone whose preparation and deadly capabilities rivaled their own. The woman they'd both underestimated was about to prove just how dangerous underestimation could be. But Sarah revealing her true abilities started a chain reaction that none of them had expected or planned for. When Torres and the newcomer realized what Sarah really was beneath her carefully constructed cover, they understood that their personal fight had just become part of something much bigger, much more dangerous, and much more likely to end with all of them dead on the floor of a gun shop in the middle of nowhere. The newcomer's reaction to Sarah's revealed skills showed he had his own hidden training and resources that went far beyond what a simple revenge seeker should possess. When Sarah saw how quickly and professionally he adapted to the changing tactical situation, she realized her 8 year operation had run into someone whose preparation, resources, and deadly determination matched her own agency's commitment to bringing Torres to justice. Torres proved why he'd managed to survive 8 years as one of the world's most wanted men. When Torres started using Sarah's shop layout to create improvised defensive positions, both Sarah and the newcomer understood they were facing someone whose survival abilities had been sharpened by years of avoiding capture by the world's best intelligence agencies and most motivated bounty hunters. But Torres had made one critical mistake in all his years of careful preparation. When Torres tried to use the weapons that Sarah had modified from over the years, he discovered that 8 years of trust had been repaid with the ultimate betrayal. Sarah's modifications revealed their true purpose at the exact moment Torres needed his weapons most, and that revelation would prove to be his downfall. Sarah's 8 years of patient planning reached its devastating climax in a way that stunned both men and proved the value of long-term operational thinking. When Torres's weapons failed to function as they should have, he understood with terrible clarity that every modification Sarah had made over the years had purposes far beyond what he'd requested. Sarah had spent 8 years making sure Torres would be completely helpless when she finally decided to reveal her true intentions and bring his reign of terror to an end. The final confrontation tested every skill all three people had developed over years of the most dangerous training in the world. And when the smoke finally cleared, the truth about who had been hunting whom became clear in ways that none had fully understood when the deadly game began. If you enjoyed discovering the shocking truth behind Sarah's 8 year hunt and want to see more incredible stories of deception, betrayal, and justice, make sure to subscribe to Untold Legends Stories for more amazing tales of ordinary people living extraordinary lives. Hit that notification bell so you never miss our daily uploads, and let us know in the comments what you thought of this incredible revelation. Tomorrow's story will show you that sometimes the longest cons are the ones we play on ourselves, and your support means everything to us as we continue bringing you the most compelling, untold stories from around the world.